Brian Lara used pot plants to work on his placement. John Wright glued his glove to his bat. Sachin Tendulkar dug up practice pitches. Tatenda Taibu cut the top off his bat. Claire Taylor used a hockey grip. Steve Smith was from tennis. Dean Jones would call phantom runs. And Victor Trumper turned the nets into a war zone to survive. The best batters in the world do whatever they have to make runs. We have told their stories in our new book, The Art of Batting. All right, welcome everyone to another Good Areas live podcast. This is the Wagon Wheel, the show where we answer your questions on cricket. If you're live with us on YouTube at the moment, the best way to do that is via Super Chat. Obviously, there's an IPL game on, so we might not get many Super Chats today. But we had just hours and hours of technical problems trying to get this one up and running. So it ended up being when it was for many different reasons. But if not, you can always ask questions via Patreon, like the way that everyone else does. Or I should say, like PJ's done. So you go to Good Areas podcast on Patreon, and you can find that over there. PJ says, while I understand there are large expat groups of Aussies and South Africans in the UK, particularly in London, I was surprised to see the World Test Championship final sell out days wonderful more than a month ago, starting at 45 quid a pop. Is there any other country or city in the world where neutrals would sell out a test match to watch two foreign teams? Or does this all depend on India making a final? Yeah, I mean, if India were playing anywhere, that would probably sell out. I think that's probably fair. Yeah, I mean, it's easy to make fun of England at certain times. And obviously, we have the whole imperial Commonwealth thing going on. But it does mean that there are a lot of people with vested interests in other countries in a way that is not quite the case in other countries, right? Like, there is a natural influx of people back to the UK. It's why playing a tournament like the Champions Trophy probably makes more sense in England than it does anywhere else, because you're going to get fairly high crowds everywhere, because there are Sri Lankans and Afghanistan and New Zealanders and whatever it may be everywhere. I think also the World Test Championship is starting to become a bit of a thing, PJ. I could be wrong, but a lot of people have asked me about it. So maybe there is an element of that going on as well. You know, the first one, was it during lockdown? I can't even remember now, but like, when was the first one? 2021. Yeah, so that was at a weird time. 2023 was Australia, India. That was really good crowds. Maybe it's just become a bit of a event that people want to go to. But I don't know. That'll probably be an easier question to answer when I'm there and I can see how many people are actually, involved. KG says, are there any new technical or tactical innovations across batting, bowling, fielding that you're currently excited about? I mean, generally when I notice something, KG, they probably come up. There's something I've been working on for a little while, which is probably a new selection, I think is maybe the better way of putting it. Like, it's really clear now that teams aren't as worried about just getting people who can bowl 90 miles an hour or even 87, 88 miles an hour. I think Sam Cook is the most recent case of this, where teams are like, no, we're willing to pick people who can bowl a little bit slower because the wobble ball is so destructive that we think that they can have a hold. So I think that's probably something that has taken over for a little while. I'm trying to think if there's anything else obvious I'm missing. I think after a long period of time, teams in T20 cricket are getting a little bit smarter with spin. I worked this out in about 2018, and it's fascinating to me how few analysts really followed up. Most analysis is done with seam bowling. And I had this theory that there are certain people who get fours and sixes when the ball was bowled straight at them, and other people who needed it to be away from them. And I think we are now starting to see that a little bit more. Shivam Dubé is probably a good example of someone like that. Where people are understanding, actually, it's not that they can hit every ball for 4 and 6, they can hit certain balls for 4 and 6. And the other one, I suppose, is the reverse swing, right? Like, if you try and reverse swing it more, you're going to get more reverse swing. I think Aaron has made a pretty good case that the saliva has absolutely nothing to do with it. Connor says, do you think the removal of the coal pack system post-Brexit will be beneficial to South Africa, Zimbabwe, West Indies, red ball cricket? Probably New Zealand as well, I suppose. Or does it just push young talent towards T20 franchise leagues? I suppose, I'm trying to think of the best way of putting it. I suppose there will be people who are not T20 players who will be more likely to be in the game than they were from before. So from that perspective, even even if the vast majority go to T20 cricket, maybe a few will still go into their nation's test setup or test lineups or whatever that may be. So yeah, I would assume it would have some positive markers. I mean, Blessing Muzrambani is playing for the national team right at the moment, right? Sikandar Raza, when he got good, probably would he have been? I'm trying to think whether he'd be a county player or maybe he would have gone franchise anyway. I'm trying to think of some of their other players. Bennett probably would go towards franchise. I mean, Sean Williams probably would have gone off to play county cricket, I would have thought, at this stage. That would have made more sense, wouldn't it? So, yeah, I think there's probably a small boom, but not enough to, like, save anyone or anything like that. Ellie says, thoughts on Mike Hesson becoming the white ball coach of Pakistan? Assuming this is for long haul, how do you see this appointment given the skill sets of current Pakistani players? Well, we cannot assume it is for the long haul because it is a Pakistani coaching position. What am I assuming? I'm assuming... I have to be a little bit careful here. I am assuming that he has taken the job with the thought of one specific tournament or series or whatever that may be. Because I don't think anyone, especially someone as calculated as Mike Hesson, would be going, oh, I'm definitely going to be there in 3 years' time. So I think there's still a lot of talent around, and there's just some open goals that you can fix in Pakistan cricket if you are willing to do things correctly. And that's always been the problem. They quite often say they are, then they change their plan anyway. But maybe if it's a short-term plan, it's like he's going to stay there for, I don't know, 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or whatever it may be. He can actually just come in and sweep a lot of things and change it and then move it forward, which is kind of what it needs. I've said for ages, it's not the coach that is the important one in Pakistan cricket. It is director of cricket, general manager, whatever all. That's the person they have to nail. Coaches are far less important in modern cricket. When you're talking about all the issues in Pakistan, it needs to be someone who is realistically in charge. And I think we can tell from Jason Gillespie and Gary Kirsten that is not the case. MF Jim says, the enhanced games are back in the news and got me thinking, who would be some of the best cricketers if performance-enhancing drugs were legal? I want to say the Morkel brothers or Chris Gale would start hitting 150-meter sixes and could get Josh Hazlewood up to 180 with the great right programs. So for those who don't know, the enhanced games are this random dude who just wants to allow athletes to take as many drugs as they can to see if everyone can break all the world records with them. I just still don't see how that works because I just don't see how he doesn't get sued by a bunch of athletes who end up with a fourth testicle or 9 nipples or, hair coming out of every orifice or whatever it may be. Because it just, I don't know, maybe you can get away with it, but it just seems weird. If you're literally saying it's the enhanced games, are you not saying that people should be taking things? I don't know. Anyway, no, I don't think it'd be Morkel brothers. He said the Morkel brothers, didn't he? No, I think you'd be looking at the most highly skilled players. Like, I don't know, can you get Sam Cooke or Vernon Philander to bowl 88 miles per hour rather than 80 miles per hour, right? Can you get the, I mean, Ashwin's a bad example, but I suppose Washington Sundar or I'm trying to think of another team coming through with a spinner who would be interesting at the moment. Gudakesh Modi to bowl 5 to 7 miles an hour quicker. So I think it should help the highly skilled guys become better athletes. But yeah, it would also help some of the better athletes take it to a whole different level. But I'm trying to think of something that would help. I mean, if you could get to a point where, and I don't think you can, because I don't think this is how swings work, but I suppose if you can get to a point where you can be like, my mishits can still go for 6. And I know we talk a lot about that, but if you actually have a look, it's very rare for a missit to go for 6. But if you can get to a level where that happens quite consistently, so for Albie Merkel or Chris Gale or someone who just hits the ball really, really hard, I think that would be quite interesting. Mob says, since your Science of Swing podcast lifted lid on things like the importance of shining both sides, have you noticed teams or bowlers using or discussing swing in a different way? I mean, the truth is, Mob, you don't see a lot of swing. So, no. I found it really interesting that... Oh, who was it? I find it really interesting that England still talk about the weather, even though they have the science to say that they shouldn't, and that their own scientist says that the weather doesn't play any impact. So I wonder if they have agreed with him or disagreed, or they're just using it a bit like how when the Denver Nuggets play at home, you get told about the altitude, how you might have shortness of breath, which of course you will, but you will also get over quite quickly. Is there a psychological thing there that you want to be important? I don't know. I don't know exactly how that works. But no, teams still don't try and swing the ball that much, right? So I don't think I've noticed any changes. Rob says, I think the England-Zimbabwe test was great for the game, but how would you rank the Zimbabwe players and the team? Are they a strong first-class side? Look, they beat Bangladesh recently. They've played some good cricket. They're probably a really good spoiler team in Test cricket. We didn't see the best of them against England because they, Ngarava just bowled really poorly. Blessing didn't bowl anywhere near as well as he could. I wouldn't go as far to say he was poor, but that just allowed England to get away, and then they stuffed up their usage of Nauchi, and Chavanga just isn't accurate enough to bowl against guys of that quality. Chatai probably should have played in that test match. I can understand why he didn't, because they got so many older guys, but he probably should have played in that test match as the third seamer or the fourth seamer, however you want to look at it. Maybe that would have allowed them at first change to just rein things back in again. Instead, I think Chavanga came on and got absolutely hammered everywhere. Then they panicked and they brought back both of their two main bowlers before they brought Nauchi on. Then he lost the plot. But for those of us who've watched Zimbabwe cricket, we've also seen how this bowling attack works. And it's Blessing taking early wickets, Ngarava occasionally going on a spree, and usually first or second change bowling quite well. That is more of an international quality bowling lineup. The batting is, even though it performed really well in this test match, a little bit more scattering, right? Like you've got Ben Curran, who struggled to make, I don't think ever made 100 for Northants. Could be a very good, decent option for them to open the batting, but is not a star. Bennett's made that big 100. I don't even know what his ceiling is at the moment, but I didn't expect him to make a test 100 opening in England, having watched him play in T20 leagues. Then you've got three guys all batting one position too high, who are all basically 40 years old, right? But they're not untalented, those three. They're all slightly one position too early, but then none of them are untalented. And then the batting drops off quite dramatically. So I think that sort of the bowling drops off quite dramatically after the first ball, especially if they're not going to pick their senior bowlers. And the batting drops off quite dramatically after the number 5 position. That's kind of set up like a first-class side, but I would say that Blessing is much better. Even Ngarava is probably better. That is a really good first-class bowling attack, right? And then you have the all-round options as well. I know that some of the all-rounders weren't able to bowl in this game, which did change things a little bit for them. But they do have, a genuine options with the ball in the top, 5 in this game? 5? Yeah, 5 in this game. But their number 6 still a project player. Their number 7 is not particularly very good with the bat. And then it's, they've got 2 number 10s and 2 number 11s probably coming in after that. So they're probably better than a first-class team. But they've also got maybe more holes than a decent first-class team would have. MF Jim says, what is the quality of County Division 2? It's pretty derided in Australia, as most clubs have a player or two who have gone and played it at my level. Sub-turf, so one level under Premier League cricket. Okay. There's still lots of very good players in it. It's a bit of a weird one. It hasn't quite filtered. It's not as if all the best players are in Division 1, all the second best players are in Division 2. So it's probably a little bit more like a situation you have in somewhere like Melbourne with club cricket, where you have district cricket and you have sub-district both happening at the same time. Whereas sub-district, there'll be 2 or 3 or 4 good players for a side, but then you'll have a bunch of kids maybe, or a bunch of guys who probably shouldn't be playing at that level. Whereas in district cricket, you have a lot stronger lineup all the way through. And that's what happened a little bit in County Division 2. I don't think the players at the top end are an issue. I think the players beneath that are a little bit more of an issue. you're still playing against professional cricketers. You're still going up against a team of analysts, get video stuff. You've got dietitians, everything else. It's not like club cricket, but it's not also massively strong. It's probably somewhere between district cricket and second 11 cricket in Shield. Well, I should say it's probably somewhere between like Sydney district cricket or grade cricket and what do they have? And then second 11 cricket, the way it used to be in Australia, right? So it's a combination of both of those things. And that was when the Australian second 11 competition was really, really good. It's not obviously at that level anymore for many different reasons. But that's probably where it is, right? It's a lower end. A bit like some of the first-class cricket that was played in South Africa, some of the first-class cricket that's even played in India, right? Like there are plenty of first-class competitions where there are weaker bits. We kind of focus on England, but it's quite common to have that sort of thing. And also, I would argue it's a better system. I think you can make a really good argument in English cricket that you could have 25 or 26 teams and have 3 divisions, or 24 teams, let's say, and have 3 divisions. Promotion and relegation, and then you have essentially a younger league, a bunch of guys who hope they can make it to Division 1 and everything else. But it's not really how county cricket's run at the moment. Let us take a quick break here on the Wagon Wheel, and we will be back for more of all the sorts of things that we talk about. I'm trying to think of what we actually talk about. All the things we talk about on Wagon Wheel. What's the most random thing we talk about on Wagon Wheel? I don't know.
As a cricket journalist, I would travel sometimes up to 200 days a year. I loved watching cricket games. I loved going to new countries. It was an absolute dream. But there was one thing I hated more than anything else about it, and it was this little pin. The thing that I need to change my SIM card in every new country. The absolute worst thing about this pin and SIM cards is when I was traveling to the West Indies, of having to arrive in every new island or country and having to work out if I could still find this pin and then line up and get my SIM card in every single airport. Well, now we have the answer thanks to Sally. They can make it so you never have to worry about this nonsense ever again. They use an eSIM app that once you install once, it is easy, simple, and cheap. Oh, and it works in more than 160 countries. And you can...
All right, welcome back. Neil says, Arshdeep seems a slightly left field pick for India versus England. Not the most consistent with his lines in domestic red ball cricket. Not consistently quick. He swings the ball, but not sure how conductive the dry and warm conditions this summer will be for that. What do you make of his red ball prospects? Surely it can't just be for variety. I think taking a swing bowler to England makes sense, doesn't it? If Shami was going to play, maybe you don't take Arshdeep. I don't think you want to be in a situation where you get to England and you don't have a swing bowler. And I've seen Australia get stuck with that a couple of times before, where they end up with a bunch of guys who are essentially all seam bowlers and whatever Mitchell Starc is. If you have one available to you and things click for him, you can bring him in. So I'm not against it. I'm not sure you would line. I mean, the issue really comes down to how many frontline seamers they're playing. Can you bowl him as the 4th frontline seamer if you have Jadeja playing at 7, right? Probably you can. I mean, your batting is the issue then, but probably you can from a bowling perspective. So you're right. I think we've seen this. I reckon one of the times that I noticed it the most was in the USA when they were on that terrible New York pitch, and all he had to do really was bang the ball into the wicket and let the wicket do all the work for him. And instead, he bowled wide and he kept trying to swing it. And there are sometimes I think that Arshdeep doesn't quite understand how to do anything else. And when I say bowl wide, I mean the other issue is that he's not always as accurate as test bowlers are, or first-class bowlers are, as you point out. So, yeah, I think it's a weird one. I really do, but I can understand why you would take him to England. Sandeep says, Lord Thakur or Nitesh Reddy, your preferred pick for relief pacer batter into playing 11 for England tests, and why? Well, Shardul Thakur is not a batter at all. So they're completely different cricketers, right? So it's not so much who my pick is, it's really how I am setting my team up. If I want a genuine 7 batting options with someone who can bat at number 8, then Nitesh being in the side makes a lot more sense than Shardul, right? If I want to go the other direction, and I want to make sure that I have 4 seam bowlers who can all take wickets at different times, and make sure that I've at least got one seamer who can hold a bat, then obviously that you go with Shardul. So that comes down to the wickets, the pitches, and everything else. I pretty much not been on the record, even when he was playing really good, at saying I just don't think Shardul Thakur is that level of cricketer. I feel more comfortable playing him perhaps at times in maybe Australia or South Africa or New Zealand than I do in England at the moment, just because my worry is that the England players will decide to take him on and they will score it more than a run ball against him pretty easily. And weirdly enough, he's not, because he's not very good at white ball bowling. Once you go at him, he doesn't really have any other options other than hoping you make a mistake. The problem with playing Nitesh Reddy comes in a very different angle of, firstly, what do you expect him to average with the bat? And I think that's a really important thing that you need to sort of decide as a team. Is he going to average 35 to 40 with the bat? And if that's the case, can you get Shane Watson or Paul Collingwood overs out of him, right? Craig McMillan type thing of, you get 10 overs. They're not horrendous 10 overs. Perhaps in his case, because of his abilities, you can bowl him a little bit earlier in the day when the ball's still doing something. So he can bowl like that sort of callous second change position. Callis would come on around like the 14 to 16 over mark, 12 to 14 over mark, whatever it may be. And, whoever the first change was, Mackay or Mornay or whomever, would come on, and he would sort of come on at the other end, nibble it around a little bit, try and get you a wicket if he didn't, and then he would come on again later to bowl a second or a third spell. Maybe in Nitesh's case, you probably bowl 4 overs and then 3-4 over spells, and that gets you to 12 throughout the day. That allows Jadeja to bowl another 15, 16, and you're looking at 30 overs, so 60 overs, so 20 overs for your other 3 seamers, which all seems very, very fair and reasonable and manageable. This isn't the kind of conditions that really suit either of these guys either of these kinds of bowlers. I think both of them would prefer more traditional English conditions where the ball's nibbling around a lot more. Although it has been moving in some county games. I don't want to say that there's been no lateral movement, but Old Trafford and Edgbaston have certainly had some flat wickets. And even at Trent Bridge, I thought it was flat at times, but there was a little bit of sideways movement. So it's not like they're dead flat or anything and dead dry. I think you make an argument for either of those players. I think if it was me, I'd probably just pick my best 4 seamers. And then I would have Washington and Jadeja available in the squad to mix and match. Not mix and match. I would have Jadeja obviously automatically in the team. But think about if the summer does continue to go the way it's going towards the end of the summer, can you go to 5 and 3? And that's how you overcome it. I'm very suspicious of the good number 8 theory. This idea that your number 8 can average 22 and that makes you a better batting unit, I've never really held with that. I think you pick your best 4 bowlers and you just have to suck it up. And there's also another way of doing this altogether, which is they pick their best 3 seamers and bat Jadeja at number 8. Right? Like, you don't have to go in with 5 bowlers. Just because you have the all-rounder doesn't mean you have to play it in that way. You can actually play it in a different way. So I think there are multiple options that they have. But if you're going to play Nitesh Reddy and you got Jadeja at 7 and you got him at 8, I think you're kind of playing 4 bowlers at that point. So you're still sort of playing into my theory there. PJ says, you mentioned before about youth teams, whether it's school, club, or representative level, not picking the best keeper, but rather picking the best keeper out of the top 7 batters, which has possibly led to a decline in wicket keeping. Would the same principle not apply to captaincy? Youth teams never select the best captain, but rather the best captain out of an already selected best 11. Does this mean that because potential great captains are not in the best 4 batters or best bowlers in their under-19 team, are we missing out on the next Graham Smith, Steve Waugh, Emma Stoney, or Clive Lloyd, or Mike Brearley? The problem, you're right, PJ, and you're wrong. I mean, your examples are wrong, because Graham Smith, Steve Waugh, Emma Stoney, and Clive Lloyd are all going to get picked anyway. because they are very good at cricket. So I don't think that's actually an issue. I don't think captaincy is so important that it should come from outside of your best 7 players. There are probably certain situations where you have to do that, and I think that's pretty fair. But in general, I just don't think that it's that important. Whereas I think wicket-keeping, a wicket-keeper in a test match, it has hundreds of touches of the ball. I just think they're a much more important part of that. And it's also, we can objectively, with advanced mathematics and advanced analysis, we would be able to tell if someone is a better than average wicketkeeper or not. It's much harder with captaincy. And there are heaps of things that we would never be able to factor into the captaincy that we would be able to factor into the wicket-keeping matrix. So, for instance, I've told this story before about in Wimbledon when I was at St. Lucia. There was a terrible captaincy decision made by Kieran Pollard. I think if you're just doing analysis and you had no access, you'd be like, that's terrible. Pollard's made a mistake here. Then I talked to Pollard and I understand why he's made that mistake. And it wasn't his fault. It was basically the players around him, not him. And, one guy didn't want to bowl at one end. And it completely stuffed up because he didn't know that guy didn't bowl from that end. And so you end up in this weird situation, right? You're probably right. We might not get our next Mike Brearley. I would argue, though, that the only people that have ever been like Mike Brearley have actually been people from the upper class of England. And realistically, most working class cricketers with incredible cricket brains who average, what did Mike Brearley average in first class cricket? Was it under 30? It seems low, doesn't it? I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head. He averages in first class cricket 37.8. So his first class cricket wasn't too bad. It just didn't translate to test cricket where he averaged 23 over 39 matches. I think, so when you mention someone like Mike Brearley, he's not there because Mike Brearley is a genius. He's there because he comes from the right kind of education and the right kind of background, right? It's not to say that Mike Brearley wasn't a good captain, but it would mean that people would start to pick the best statesman again, which was a terrible idea. If you read Wigmore's book, he makes a fairly good argument that one of the reasons that Australia dominated in the Ashes so long is they were picking 11 players and England were picking 10 players. Because they thought that captaincy was so important that that the right kind of man could captain 10 players and beat Australia's 11 players. And Australia picked their captain from the 11 players. I don't think that's quite the same as wicket keeping. I think they're two different skills and they go in very different areas. So I don't think I'd be as confident as saying that as I would be. The other thing is, I'm just looking at your list here now. I've said this a million times. Can someone prove to me that Steve Waugh was a good captain? I watched almost every test match in Australia that he was involved with, quite a few overseas. Right before I was a cricket writer, but I watched them all. I just remember him just putting 5 slips in place to some of the best fast bowlers in the world and waiting for people to edge. I don't remember much tactical genius from him. The captain before him was Mark Taylor, who was much better tactically. Michael Clarke, who doesn't get much credit, I thought was a much better tactical captain than Steve Waugh. This kind of proves the point of why it's so hard. Now, do that with 12 and 13-year-olds. So I've been working with under 11s, under 13s for a little while. The kids, there's a couple of kids that obviously show leadership potential. There's some that read the game more naturally than others. I was working with one kid and I was trying to explain that, how he got the field wrong, and I could teach him in one lesson how to get it a little bit better. Most of them are the better cricketers because they see all the little things. There's the odd player who maybe isn't quite at that level, and maybe it was a cricketer like me who could see it but can't do it, right? I was always the vice captain or the captain of every cricket team. Even when I was playing, and even when I was 15, 16, the senior captains, 40-year-old men would come and ask my opinions for things, right? Even though I wasn't even ever going to be better than some of them. they would still ask my opinions, but I don't know if like that level of like tactical stuff would have helped any more than just having another cricketer who was better than me in my position, right? So I don't know. I get really squidgy about captaincy because we say Steve Waugh was really good because his team was really good, right? There's elements of the other three that I think is slightly different to that. But geez, I reckon I could have captained Graham Smith's team for a lot of that period. Now, Graham Smith and I think Clive Lloyd deserve extra credit because they kind of assembled that team. South Africa wasn't fully broken, but we were a little bit broken. West Indies were a little bit broken. Satchmo's done a lot of work on this to look at how long it took for Clive Lloyd to actually go all in on his own theory, which was brilliant. So what's interesting to me is in the list that you put in here, you haven't put, say, Stephen Fleming. You haven't put some of these other sort of Owen Morgan type cricketers who are not as naturally at the top. I think we eventually look at captains by their results. Not all the time. Ricky Ponting's probably a good example of someone who maybe we didn't, but generally we just look at captaincy by their results. And so I don't think there's even a good way to rate captains at the moment. Thomas says, Shoaib Bashir, 74 average for Somerset, 40 for England. Why do you think this is? Is it him feeling more at home with England or something else? I think it's funny. I was talking to George Dobell during the last test match. He was sitting next to me in the press box. And I said, it's really fascinating to me that how every time there's a sort of a low pressure situation in a game where wickets are probably going to fall, Ben Stokes just gives the ball to Shoaib Bashir. And so he takes wickets and then everyone goes, oh, wow, okay, his record's slightly improving, whatever. In county cricket, he probably has to bowl as a major bowler when he bowls, and he probably has to bowl when there's nothing in the wicket and there's nothing going on. So I think there's an element of that. I think there is an element of he's probably, and I would have to look this up, Shoaib Bashir. There's probably an element of the fact that some of that record would come from Asia. And I'm just guessing off the top of my head here. Let's have a look. Tests. What's his average in Asia? Yeah. So nope, that's absolutely the wrong thing I just looked at. No, I've got it here. So in Asia, he averages 38. And he averages, 50. But he's still got a pretty good record in England. But I just think the amount of times I've seen him come on bowling to left-handed tail enders and everything else, I think Ben Stokes uses him really well, but also can use him really well. Where he will probably struggle is more when he has to be a frontline bowler all the time. Test pitches are generally better for spin than first-class wickets anyway, and that's going to be even more so in the UK, where they're, especially these days, so many of the, first-class grounds in the UK try and make wickets that seam around quite a bit. So Shoaib Bashir should have that as well. It could also just be a little bit of dumb luck, right? And I don't mean that in a particularly bad way, but what I mean by that is when he went to New Zealand, he took 8 wickets in 3 matches at 51. I think that's probably more his level. And I think 74 is obviously not his level. And around 40 to 50 is probably more his level at the moment. And he's still really, really young. But yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to usage. Yeah, he's not a part-timer, Thomas, but if you think about this from a part-timer, you can if you have a part-timer, Simon Kadich is a good example of this, maybe Michael Bevan. I think this could have been the case for someone like Virender Sehwag, but he probably bowled a little bit too much. Joe Root, if you just use them in situations that were in their advantage, they'll probably end up with a pretty decent record, right? Like, bowling average under 40 at least, right? Maybe even under 35. But if you ask them to bowl all the time, what was Joe Root's average? 45, 47? I don't know what Sehwag's was, right? Like, if you ask Michael Bevan to bowl in every single game in the first innings as a frontline bowler, he wouldn't have ended up with the great record he did, right? Or Simon Kadich, because they weren't that good. Because if they were that good, they'd be specialist bowlers. And so that actually happens for specialist bowlers as well. And Thomas, the best one to look at is the Shoaib, no, not Shoaib, Stuart McGill. He's obviously in the press for a lot of different reasons. But Stuart McGill had a pretty similar record to Shane Warne in the test matches that they played. But Stuart McGill only came in when the wickets were ragging. They needed 2 spinners most of the time. Whereas Shane Warne had to bowl on every wicket, no matter whether it was spinning or not. Sam says, tentatively, has cricket started to grow up a little bit regarding bans? Rabada's case was bereft of hyperbole, and now Brendan Taylor seems likely to be accepted back with open arms, assuming he can still play. Feels like sea change from the Hales, Sandpaper Gate, Sri Lankans in Durham era. It's a really good point, actually. I mean, the Sandpaper one was one of the worst ones I've ever seen. And I said it from the start. Cricketers had been cheating by tampering with the ball basically since there has been a ball. Almost every single occasion you've ever seen a reverse swing involves some form of tampering with the ball. I'm not saying they shouldn't have been penalised, but you can't go from Faf du Plessis being penalised the same amount for his shoelaces to suspending people for a year. It's just insanity, right? The Sri Lankans in Durham, again, like, I get it. And I understand it was COVID times and people were freaking out and all that sort of stuff. And it was, it was a really big deal for Sri Lanka to, be able to help England out and blah, 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 blah. But was it Dick Waller was given like a lifetime ban? Like, what? So those I think were more things where they had embarrassed the brand of cricket. I can't remember Hales' one. So I know he was, but I don't remember the full one. They had embarrassed the brand of the cricket team they were looking for. And so there was an overreaction, right? Like, without any doubt there. I don't think that is the normal though, Sam. I think that was I think Sandpaper Gate was one of the more ridiculous things I've ever come across. And that somehow the Sri Lankans in Durham was 3 times worse, right? If you go through, I don't think we have that many cases of that kind of stuff. I think we've had a few where people have been able to come back and everything else. So maybe we just had a couple of outliers due to whatever reason there, and we've moved beyond them a little bit. Rob says, I understand full ICC members are required to have a first-class structure, but wouldn't it be more beneficial for the smaller nations to join a larger nation's first-class competition to upskill their players? Ireland and Scotland teams joining the county championship, and Zimbabwe and Namibia joining South Africa. Is this a lack of imagination ability from the administrators, financially based, or something else? I think the idea being that if you eventually want to become the best you can be, you need your own first-class structure, which is probably true. Going ahead... So eventually, if you want to get to your top end ceiling, you probably do need a first class structure. In the short term, it is probably better to join someone else's. There were issues. So Ireland and Scotland have both been involved in county cricket, but the Netherlands as well. I'm trying to think. Was that List A cricket? I think they were involved in maybe the 40 over league. I can't remember which one, but they obviously played within the county system. Namibia, the same. Zimbabwe, originally the same as Rhodesia. So yes, I do think there is a strength in that. But eventually, I think you have to come up with your own systems. But there's many reasons why it doesn't happen. One of the reasons is, I think it's very hard for the teams to pay. Like, I think it would be very hard for Ireland and Scotland to come up with a system that would allow for them to pay what the ECB would be happy to be paid for. Does that make sense? Like, I don't. The ECB aren't going to do it just out of the kindness of their own heart. Right? They're just not. They have to make sure at least because the counties are going to have to pay for it, right? So I think that's awkward. It's also a little bit awkward that in the middle of your summer, your county team suddenly is going to lose. Like, let's imagine it was Ireland. They have one team. Ireland's suddenly going to lose their best 11 players. That's a bit awkward. The more international cricket they have, the weaker that side is. Then who plays in that team? You still have to have first-class cricket at home. So I have talked to, and I'm sure if you're an associate person and you've dealt with this before, there's lots of reasons why teams don't do this. Financial, contractual are a big part of it. A lot of it is just that it's during the height of your summer as well. But you're right. In the short term, I mean, Ireland got good because of county cricket, right? Everyone knows that. I think what these teams, when you talk to them, and I've talked to Cricket Ireland and Cricket Scotland about this. I don't think I've talked to any of the other teams, but I've certainly talked to them about it. That is like, eventually we have to work out how to make our own players and make our players good, one way or another. And they're probably right, I think, long term. Neil says, what are your memories of the Melbourne Docklands Stadium? Do you think it gets an unfair rap as a cricket venue? P.S. Forever the Telstra Dome to me. Australia versus World 11, anyone? Yeah, so I went to... Was Australia South Africa the first time? At the Docklands. Most of us in Melbourne called it the Docklands, I think. Partly because we figured it would change names. I don't know. Is it Marvel Dome or something now? Was it Marvel Arena? Honestly can't even remember what the real name is, which just tells you how silly it was not to call it Docklands, because that's what everyone in the city was calling it to begin with. And then you could have put your sponsor in front of it. That was weird. So I have to have a look. So was it? I think it's Cricinfo got it as Docklands ground. Yeah, they've got it as Docklands Stadium. So this one's stats and records. So yeah, so I went to the first ODI there. So that was in 2000, and that was in August, in the middle of footy season. It was bizarre. God, Australia made 295. I don't remember that at all. Did Hussey make runs? Am I right? No, Hussey didn't play in that game. Bevan made runs. Steve Orr. I don't remember that at all. Yeah. I remember seeing Hussey make runs there. That might have been against the World 11, whenever that was later on. It's so weird. So what do I know about the stadium? What do I remember about the stadium? When I first went there, it just felt odd. It was not in cricket season, it just doesn't work. Australians go to cricket during cricket season. They have a cricket season. It goes for about 2.5 months. I think you could stretch it, and I think the Big Bash was the perfect example of something that should have stretched it. But August in Melbourne, everyone only cares about the footy, right? And so it was weird. It sounded different. That's the thing I remember. It just didn't sound like a cricket venue, and that was the one that I remember. I think it was quite dark, and I'm assuming it was just a dark day, as in, but it just felt really dark during the sunlight at that time. So it was just, there were lots of little things that were very, very odd about it, and it's got a different sound. So if you've ever been to, any cricket ground with the concrete stands, there's the ball hits the bat, and it sort of reverbs in a particular way. And I'm not an acoustics engineer or anything, and there's something about it, the way the ball would reverb in Docklands, it just sounds weird. So that was the first time. I would have been there for the World 11 as well, which might have been the Mike Hussey one I'm thinking about. I've got a memory of Mike Hussey hitting the roof when I was there, but I could be wrong. And then I probably covered, another 6 to 8. In fact, I went to one as a fan, but I've probably been to another 6 to 8 Big Bash games, women's and men's. I know I took my wife once. I don't think my kids were old enough to go. But yeah, and it's the same. It just feels a bit weird. It also, my memory of it is for Big Bash games. I don't remember this for the other ones, but I just remember it gets really stuffy and hot in there. And I haven't been there for a while, so maybe they fixed this. But yeah, it just felt like you were in a waiting room for a doctor surgeon who was too cheap to get air conditioning. I'm not selling this, am I? I may not get any special treatment the next time I go to the Docklands. But yeah, I just remember it being really weird. And weird things too, like the press box was incredibly tiny, right? I actually like it. Like, I've been to footy games there and I've enjoyed it, but it's always felt a bit stuffy to me. But when it's hot, I was there on a 40-degree day once, and we're just melting. And I think the roof might have been shut as well. I can't remember now. But yeah, I don't know how to explain this. It just doesn't sound like cricket. And eventually we will get used to it. But those are my memories anyway. Sandeep says, Gujarat got away in the league stages with shallow batting depth, but with 3 excellent top run producers and also good bowling plans. What describes this nearer school of bowling? Any unique markers? They've just got a good bowling attack. I think that's pretty fair. Siraj has been a bit up and down. Prashant Krishna has had a year that no one would have expected. Sai Kishore has come in and bowled absolutely, brilliantly as well. They've been able to hold up with some other seamers coming through. They've got a good bowling lineup, and they consistently make above par scores. There's nothing kind of surprising about it. Well, I shouldn't say surprising. There's nothing remarkable about it. The surprising thing is that they've managed to do it all year with 3 batters, right? That is probably the thing that is the most weird. And generally what happens in this situation is you get to the finals. In this case, you lose Josh Butler. You go up against the best bowlers. You go up against, I don't know, let's say Hazelwood, and he nips one away, and one of your openers is gone, and you're now playing a different sport than you played all season. That's the problem with being really dependent on one thing, you kind of see it in any sport. If you're so dependent on one thing and that one thing breaks down, there isn't really a plan B or plan C that we're aware of with this side at the moment. I think they're a good bowling side without being a great bowling side, but that's still pretty handy. But we don't even know how that rest of their batting order is going to go, right? Like it's real. How do you, if you're going to be 100 for 1 every game at a pretty good clip, not a great clip, but a pretty good clip, that's such an advantage. It's such an advantage. If you are 10 for 1, right? So I think their average opening partnership is 58. What if they're 21 for 2 or 21 for 3, right? Things change really quickly though. Let us take another quick break, and then after the break, we will come back for more of this shenaniganizing. Oh, I'm going to play the Cricket 8 ad, because this is really fun. If you get a chance to play this, definitely you should play it. Think you know bat and ball? Play the first ever social cricket trading game on Cricket 8. You can play for free, acquire virtual coins, and jump right in. In Trader, you can strategically risk coins on live cricket matches across dozens of markets. Sign up now. Don't just watch the game, play the game. All right, got a bunch of super chats actually. Shrikant says, will a reversion to back foot no ball rule encourage shorter bowlers who bowl at fuller length? I don't think we're going to change it, sadly. So this is what's really strange. I've never done a video on this, but one day I will. This is the unintended consequences. One of the reasons they went away from the back foot no ball was because they thought it helped taller bowlers. And so with that, you would have to say that they maybe one of the most spectacular miscalculations in the history of our game. They went the wrong way. So if we reverted to the back foot no ball rule, I wonder if we would get more Patharana, Malinga, Fidel Edwards. I don't know, maybe you could put someone like Mitchell Johnson. I know he's not quite in that level, but those sorts of bowlers in. Will we see more of that sort of slingier action, which was, I wouldn't say prevalent in the 20s and 30s, but it was certainly becoming a thing. And then it kind of dies off and then comes back again around the sort of Fidel Edwards, Malinga era, right? You don't really get many of them in between, but there were reports of some of them before. It might also change swing bowling. It'll go away. What you might get is more variety within your bowling. So you won't have teams that all have 6'5" guys who just hit the ball into the wicket. I'm not saying they won't all be 6'5", but you might get more rounder arm bowlers or different kinds of bowlers. I don't want it to come in though to fix those things through guns. I want it to come in to fix the fact that 8 times your body weight is going through your front foot, and that seems not like a good idea to me. And if we could take any pressure off that and spread it between the 2 feet or whatever the back foot no ball law manages to do, I would say that seems a lot better. Shrikant says, Hayden is an all-time great in your book at 34, but Mark Waugh perhaps outside the top 80. Was Mark Waugh outside the top 80? He probably was, actually. But Hayden couldn't get into the test side in the 90s during Waugh's era. How do you handle this? Was he just lucky to be 6 years younger? I think when it comes down to it, I would put Mark Waugh and Aravinda de Silva on a very similar level. I think they were more talented than Matt Hayden. But they didn't have that kind of consistency, or I don't want to say the professionalism, because I think that's the wrong way of looking at it, but the kind of ability to make runs consistently all the way through was very, very different, right? I think Matt Hayden must average, what, 8 or 9 runs more than Mark Waugh, and whatever similar against Aravinda de Silva. But I'm not saying that they're more talented than that he's more talented than them. What I'm really saying within that is that if you look at the performance of what they did, what Matt Hayden managed to do was bat in a way that essentially shaped an entire game. And that's not what Aravinda and Mark Ward did at any level of consistency in the same way. There is an element of batting in a better era. But remember, when Hayden bats into the 90s, he could get into the test team in the 90s, but he was very young. And he was also going up against Mark Taylor, who was on our long list of 80, Michael Slater, who was on our long list of 80, Matthew Elliott, who was also an absolute freak. All those guys were available for Australia at the top of the order as well. Am I missing anyone else? I think that's it as far as opening batters go. Where did Blewett bat? He batted at 3, I think, didn't he? And Langer would have batted at 3 at that point as well. So it was a bit stuffy at the top. I think that Hayden could have worked out his issues if he'd just played more Test cricket in the 90s. He's one of the few openers in the history of the game to average over 50. He's one of the few openers in the game to average over 50 with a huge strike rate. If you read the book, Srikanth, which I assume you have, you'll know that attacking openers are promoted in our book for the ability to change the game as quickly as they did. So Trumper, Greenwich, Sehwag, Hayden. Am I missing anyone else? Barry Richards would have been if he made it qualified for the list. I feel like I'm missing someone else as well. But for the pure reason that almost everyone I talked to in cricket was talking about the fact that attacking openers have such a bigger impact on the game than any other position. The second one is that I think Hayden probably still would have averaged more than Aravinda de Silva or Mark Waugh had he played in the same era as them, right? I think his great average definitely comes about from the fact he played for a short period of time. It was a great batting era and he completely dominated it. But it was also one of the best 7 or 8 year peaks that probably an opener's ever had, right? Especially when you factor in the dominance he had over bowling attacks in that period. So I still think he would have averaged in the 40s. Maybe he's closer to Trescothick, right? Who's another player who would be interesting on that kind of area. Although Trescothick does play into the good batting era a lot more than Hayden, but he does it on much tougher wickets in England. But I think for me, I think Hayden is still one I feel really conflicted about. I didn't want to over-index on the fact that he had a shorter period in the team because he wasn't like Mike Hussey. So Mike Hussey is a player who wasn't even regularly playing for Western Australia, who had lots of ordinary years. Like if you go back and look at what Matt Hayden was doing in first-class cricket, it is extraordinary. Some of the years he had in first-class cricket, we couldn't even get a test match, are absolutely extraordinary. And so you do have someone who is and Matt Hayden probably plays for an extra 5 or 6 years if Mark Taylor's not the captain, right? There's so many issues keeping Matt Hayden out. Him and Matthew Elliott probably also didn't benefit from going up against great West Indian attacks when they were coming in, when there were backups who could come in and play against other teams, right? There were all these things going against them a little bit. I still think Matt Hayden is, probably, I have him a lot higher than other people would, partly on the back of the impact that he had to the entire game. His ability to shape, him and Sehwag for me, their ability to terrify attacks and mean that you have to just completely rip up your plans and start again, right? So Matthew Hayden was someone that you legitimately had to change your plans for. You couldn't just go into a normal test match against him. I think that's a really, really important thing because that affects all of your bowlers. I'm trying to remember now, but I know it was Sehwag. I know it was Hayden, and I can't remember if there's another batter I'm forgetting, another attacking opening batter. But other than Greenwich, most of the guys who were... Oh, Warner would be the other one. He didn't quite make the list, obviously, but they were the three that were like... It didn't work when the ball was moving laterally from seam bowling, right? So Sehwag and Hayden both had their success against spin. And Sehwag was brilliant against spin. But when it was seaming around, they really struggled. but when there was extra pace and bounce and everything else. And you are... So if you're asking me who's more talented, I still would probably go with War or De Silva. But if you're asking me, because he batted in one era, like in the 2000s compared to the 90s, is there a reason that they average? And I'm gonna have to look it up on it. Mark War batting average is what, 42 and a half or something, is it? 41.8, and Aravinda De Silva batting average, it was 43. So not far from each other, right? Generally with the openers, you have to top, you mark them, so if an opener averages 42 for a number 3, 4, 5, that's probably 44 or 45, right? So even adjusted by era, unless you're looking at someone like Trumper or Grace, averaging around low 40s as a middle order player, it just doesn't compare to averaging 50 in even the easiest batting era. You still need more of a case than just averaging 50, right? So that's the Muhammad Yusuf argument. It's also the Simon Kadich argument, why he didn't get anywhere near the list, despite the fact that he had a really good record, is because the matches he played on, the batting averages were just so obscenely high that he only needed to be marginally above par and his numbers look really good. Whereas in actual fact, he was a fine player, but he obviously doesn't deserve to be in that kind of list. I think what you're talking about with Aravinda, and I've talked about this with VVS Laxman, Mark War, Roy Fredericks, it could be another one that you could put in there. I'm trying to think of some of them. Hanif Muhammad. These guys have the ability and the natural talent, whatever we call natural talent, to be way better than everyone else. But are they really in a position where they are that much more talented than... they're more talented, but are they in a position where they are consistently making more runs than anywhere else? And at a certain point, you have to make more runs for each other. I will throw him in. Nagraj from Cricket Info. We had a huge discussion about Aravinda De Silva not being in this list. And he was like, he's more talented than some of these other people. And I said, yes, but they made the runs. And at a certain point, you have to make the runs, right? Like, it's not just about your natural ability. Mark War admitted to me that he should have averaged probably closer to mid to high 40s. But he didn't. And one of the things he talked about was his lack of patience. And he also felt once he made 100, his job was done. How do you compare that with someone like Alistair Cook, who might try and bat for 4 tests and not be dismissed and never feel like his job is done? Like, there's no way that Alistair Cook is more naturally talented when it comes to picking the ball up quickly, reading what the bowler is doing, all those sorts of hard skills of batting, than Aravinda or Mark War is. But Alistair Cook, game after game, would give England absolutely great starts in conditions that were, even though he played in a batting era, England wasn't a batting era for much of that time, right? And then did it and made a lot more runs as well. Like, everything has to be factored in, I think, to these kinds of conversations, which is why they're so fascinating. Yashar says, is the gap between the full member and associate teams bigger now than it was 20 years ago? Will associates put an effort into playing ODIs after 2027? Is the gap bigger? Yes, but that's partly because the full member teams are like Ireland, Afghanistan are like our full member team. Actually, no, because there isn't that big a gap between Ireland, Afghanistan, and Netherlands. So no, I'll take it back. There's probably no. I think associate cricket's as strong as it's ever been. Watch Canada play. And I look at Hayliger, and their gun bat, whose name I've forgotten off the top of my head, Curtin. I watched associate cricket from pretty closely from 2007 onwards. Most associate teams didn't have people like Hayliger and Curtin, right? Like, I think there's still an issue, but the Dutch team, the Canada team, the Namibia team, the Scottish team, Papua New Guinea haven't managed to put it together at a World Cup, but I've seen them play some really good cricket. Nepal, USA, I think they're all really good teams. I don't think they're far away from the worst test playing nation. So I'd say that it's actually close. I think this is the strongest era I've ever seen of associate cricket, and probably by some distance, if we're being honest. Mance Hedge says, George Bailey feels to me like the last best captain, not best batter selection. Is there no Kim Upper today? No Kim Upper today. We couldn't quite find our times to work together, so we'll do one tomorrow. Roughly around our normal time tomorrow. That's why I'm doing Wagon Wheel today. It just makes sense to do it today. George Bailey feels like the last best captain, not best batter selection. Yeah, I think there was a bit of an issue with that team, if I remember back correctly. Obviously, George Bailey has a lot of natural leadership qualities. He's now the chairman of selectors. He was Tasmania's captain for a long period of time. But he was, for a period of time, a very good number 4-5. So he wasn't the best batter, but I think they were pretty solid with him being in the side. They had Warner and Maxwell, who were both quite young, I think, when Bales was captain. Who else was in that side? You had Watson. Clark hadn't really worked. So Watson would have been a weird choice. I'm trying to think of some of the other batters around at that period. So I think he was probably still in their best 6 batters for when they were using him as captain. But he was in that weird number 4, number 5, sort of, especially in T20 cricket position. And so his numbers probably didn't look as flattering. But I remember looking up his numbers from that period. They were actually really, really strong for someone who batted in that position. He quite often, he pops on some of the metrics that we used to have. So I don't think it's a case where he was like terrible or anything from that point. But also, don't think they wanted to give it to Warner. They couldn't give it to Maxwell. Probably didn't want to give it to Shane Watson. I'm trying to think, is that before or after Homework Gate as well? So there is an element of Bailey maybe being the last person standing. That isn't the only time that has probably ever happened in Australian cricket. Mark Taylor wasn't the best batter. Steve Waugh probably was. Ponting was about to take over, but probably hadn't yet. So Steve Waugh got it. But Steve Waugh was a better batter than when Taylor got it. Right? So certainly within Australian cricket, you have had that position. I think we kind of call it the best batter rule as a sort of a default. But if you go through the history of the game, it's not always that, but it's very rare that Australia will pick someone who's not an automatic member of their top 6. So they won't pick a Lee Jamon, to go back to PJ's question from before. That Lee Jamon is a proper person, and and they wouldn't pick a Roston Chase. The only time I can think of them doing that in sort of since World War II, and I could be corrected here unless I'm missing someone else obvious, is Bob Simpson. And that's during the Packer series, of course. I'm trying to think if there's any others. Obviously, during the whole Packer thing, there are other players who are captain where there are better batters, but they're not available. And then you've got Kim Hughes, probably not the best batter in the side again, but that was a little bit political. But still, he's still definitely in the best 6 batters. You can argue that Bob Simpson might have still been in the best 6 batters of that particular lineup. He was captaining as well. But he was definitely brought back to be captain. Am I missing anyone else? Ian Chappell, Greg Chappell, Bill Laurie. Yeah, most of them are automatic 6 players. So, as I said, it's very different in England. It's worth going through Wigmore's book because there's a lot of good stuff about the England captains in it. And they basically went from picking amateur captains from the right kind of families to educated captains, which is a kind of a default version of the same thing. Shrikant says, did you consciously penalise number 5 batters in your selections? Clark era is almost the same as Ponting Yusuf. Averaged nearly as much, yet not in the top 50. No, it had nothing to do with him being number 5. I would argue, though, that when he batted up the order, he struggled. So that's very different. Clark's era is actually a better batting era than Yusuf and Ponting's, though. I'm pretty right in saying, I'm saying this off the top of my head, because he would have had a lot of his peak between 2011 and 2015, which was, I think, the real great batting era. Just saying this off the top of my head, sure you can't think of it right. Clark's big issue was averaging, what did Michael Clark average away from home? That's his big issue. He never made runs away from home, and I penalised anyone who really struggled away from home. I think he had a better record than Warner. Where are we here? Yeah, he averages about 38, 39 away from home. That's why he's not in the list. That's the main reason. The other reason was and it's related to the away thing, is we looked up what the average was in the away test matches that he played. So the other top 6 players, and he was averaging, let's say it was 38, 39, which I think is right. That was exactly the same as what the par batting averages were in that period. Right? So he was as good as a par batter away from home. We can't have him as one of the greatest batters of all time. Right? He basically played on some of the flattest pitches ever. All of our metrics do that. And if you look at it as well, so you're comparing them. He starts in 2004. Ponting starts in 1996. And when's Moyo start? And Moyo's career lasted so long, the dude changed his name. He starts in 1998. So they're both 6 years before. So they both get a little bit of the 90s, which is a tougher batting era. I think 2000 might be a low batting year as well. I might be wrong there. And if you look at Mohammad Yusuf, let's have a look at his away batting record. Because Mohammad Yusuf is in Pakistan, averages 65, which is one of the reasons he almost didn't make the list. But away from home, he averages over 45. Is that right? Yeah. So he averages 6 more away from home than Clark. So yeah, I wasn't too worried about. I don't remember ever pushing Clark down because he batted at 5. If I'm right with Clark, and let me just quickly look it up. Clark plays about 100 tests at 5 and 6, and he averages about 50 odd. He played 37 tests at number 4, which is a harder batting position, and averaged 30. So I don't think I penalized him for batting at 5 and 6 because I didn't penalize Clive Lloyd for batting at 5, right? What I penalized him for specifically would have been, and I'm just talking off the top of my head, I'd have to go back and check the full notes. But what I would have penalized him for, Srikanth, was the fact that when he went up the order, he couldn't hack it, right? That does tell me that he was a bit more of a limited player. Ponting was batting at 3 when he was, 2021? He had to do stuff that Clark just didn't have to do. Clark came back into the side after being dropped and was batting at number 6 as a specialist batter. Ponting did that, and then once he got good, went to number 3, whereas Clark ends up only being good at 5. So there is an element there of when he was tested, it didn't always come out. But the away record, it's funny that you have a problem with, or not a problem, but you question Hayden, but you haven't questioned Clark. And so when you go back, you have to have a look. Ponting's record really holds up no matter what. Clark's doesn't. There is definitely question marks over Clark. The other thing with Clark, I could be wrong here, is that he has an incredible but tiny peak. Yeah. Let's have a look. Oh no, actually, he doesn't. What happens is he struggles from 2010 to 2011. That's right. And then he comes back, and he has that year in 2012 when he makes all those runs. So what's his overall average? 49. Yeah. He comes back and he makes all of those runs, and so he doesn't quite have a period like Mohammad Yusuf. And I didn't compare him to Mohammad Yusuf or Ricky Ponting, but I'm just going off the top of my head here. He doesn't quite have a period where he has like a 6 or a 7 year period where he dominates the way that a lot of the other great players do. And he also then doesn't have a very long career. So his actual career is only 11 years. Some of that is just his back, right? I think if Michael Clark had a fit back all the way through and had matured a little bit earlier, he should easily be on this list. But I'm just having a look at his away record. There's something else about his away record that we had a look at that we didn't like. So he averages 62 in Australia. He averages less than 40 in England, exactly 40 in India, 49 in New Zealand. And remember, he played a pretty weak New Zealand side. 40 in South Africa, 40 in Sri Lanka, 40 in the West Indies, right? He really struggled in the UAE and Bangladesh, not from that many matches. The average, as I said, in that period for the pitches that he played on was about 40, what the average was in those games. And he was averaging the same. So when he went away from home, he was a par player, and then at home he averages 62. So he averages 49 on the back of being just a great player at home. And he's not the only Australian player that we left out. Walters. I'm trying to think. There's a couple of other of the older players as well that we left out. But Warner was the first one that was like, even with the strike rate and the ability to play the way he did. So Warner ends up averaging about 44.5, which is about the same as Cook, but with a better strike rate, but on much easier pitches. But away from home, he ends up averaging 31.59. Now, he plays in a tougher era than Clark, right? The wobble ball comes in, he starts getting attacked around the wicket and everything else. So I don't think Clark was that far away, but I don't remember us ever getting to a position when we made an argument that, like, I wouldn't say he was in the top 55, for instance, off the top of my head there, Shrikant. Yash says, read your Pankaj Singh piece. Quite impactful. Question came to mind. What were some instances where you felt the urge to pat a player on the back and say, you did good, son? Yeah, for those who don't know, I wrote lots of words on Pankaj Singh. A lot more words than he actually bold deliveries, I think. I kind of feel that all the way, Yash. It's really hard to be a professional athlete. It's specifically really hard to be a professional bowler. I was talking to Ed Rainsford the other day, and he was just talking about how often his big toenail would come off. It's a really, really hard thing to do. Yeah, I think that you have to understand that going in. When I have the fans with laptop course, and during that course we kind of talk about the fact that you have a player who might be going through the best day of their life or the worst day of their life, and that's kind of how I like to write. Like I like to understand that I might be seeing someone on the day that they end up being remembered for, or the day that they don't end up being remembered for, and so once you sort of get to those details, I think you just think about people a little bit differently. I remember Martin Crowe reaching out to me going, enough already with the Pankaj. But he was thinking about it from an elite cricket perspective, right? He wasn't wrong. Like, I did actually write an entire piece on him. I thought that was it. I'd never write on him again. And then the next test, I think Sambit came to me and said, you're going to have to do it again. So I wrote 2 back-to-back pieces on Pankaj. But yeah, there's a weird thing with sports writing. I remember Zach Lowe talking about this a few years ago. That me and Zach Lowe have very similar careers in that we both do a bit of analytics, or at least he's aware of analytics and uses all those sorts of things in his work. We're both very plugged in. He's probably more of a beat journalist than me, but there's a lot of comparison with the sort of stuff we do, especially now with the podcast and everything else. I remember him saying, when you're writing your features, you only get the chance about once a year to write about the guy who's not in the top 20 best players. And he was talking about, he'd written a piece about Bam Adebayo. And I remember that resonating because I was like, I just don't think I could do the job if I couldn't write about Asif Karim and Pankaj Singh and Benny Howell and MLI, all these different people that I've done, because I think for me there's just a bit more storytelling. And so I know cricketers, I know what it's like. I mean, one day me and Bryce McGain will probably do the big interview where we go through his entire career, and I might make a video about the whole thing as well. And I was really lucky to be around at the start of Bryce McGain's career and be around the start of Ed Cowan's career, to be around a little bit at the end of Jonathan Trott's career. I'm trying to think of some of the others. You just realize how hard it is, all of it, right? And so that's where it comes from, right? And so when you say felt the urge to pat someone on the back of a player and say you did it, I kind of feel like that way a lot, right? I think that's a fairly normal way to feel once you get to know these people, especially as human beings, but also when you think about the story, the journey that they have been. I just want to get to this one. Sri Lanka Jana Boy says Matthews underrated in underrated list. Just on Angelo Matthews, we looked at his numbers. So he averages 44.6 now. I think it might have been slightly lower when we were running the list, but I don't remember off the top of my head. He averages about 41 away from home. He's played in both eras. Oh, no, actually, it's a bit higher because it's a neutral test, isn't it? His home and away average is about the same. I would probably put him on a list that's similar to some of the other guys we were talking about before of his best is really, really good. Again, like if you compare him to Clark actually, like he did much better at number 4 than Clark did. I'm just trying to remember all these numbers off the top of my head. But realistically, he probably is a number 5 or a number 8 batter who had to bat a little bit higher. So I think that would go in his overall record a little bit more. I just wanted to look. There was a couple of other numbers. Like he averages 42 in England, but it was 29 in India, 29 in Australia. There's just a few key markets, because one of the things you're trying to do all the way through when you come up with this list is trying to work out who the key bowling attacks that were. Sometimes it's hard because they chop and change, or sometimes someone has a really long career. But you're trying to work out who were the key bowling attacks that they went up against. And I think it would be fair to say, let's have a look overall. That certainly versus India, he averages 35, and in India averages 29. He would have gone up against mostly the good England ones. In England, he averaged 42, which is pretty good, so 43 overall. And the one against Australia, it's still under 40. He just doesn't really have anything pulling him forward. He really struggles in South Africa, for instance. But again, talent-wise, I think he's a really, really good player. And there are lots of them, and they come out kind of all the time. But yeah, you can't have everyone on the list. Like, he's certainly a Sri Lankan great. Oren says, where would you have Dennis Compton in the great test batters ever? Yeah, I've got a feeling he got scrapped with a bunch of the Australians and Peter May, because I think Dennis Compton is another player who never made runs away from home. Let me have a look here. So he averaged 50 in test cricket. It's funny how many of these great players at the first hurdle really go, averages 60 at home and 37 on the road. So I think, I could be wrong. I don't know if it was Warner or Mahala, but one of them had the lowest average. No, Warner had the lowest, but I think Mahala was a little bit higher than Compton. So no, maybe it's not Mahala I'm thinking about. It might have been Clark. But yeah, it's so dramatic when you look at it. So he plays 13 matches in Australia and he averages 33. He plays 3 matches in New Zealand at 36, and he plays 10 matches in South Africa and he averages 36. West Indies is the only one who did well. He almost averaged 50 there. South Africa's not a great bowling lineup. So that's 3 places with a pretty low average, and he wasn't playing in all that many places, all that many locations. So he makes 17 test hundreds and 13 of them are in England. What I liked about Compton is his ability to counterattack. There's elements of sort of KP about him. So there were things that I really, really did like about his batting. And I think, is he another one of these guys who... No, so he bats at 4 the majority of his time and does quite well at 4. But he's not one of the England batters that they moved him around in his position, so I couldn't even give him that, which you get with some of the others, where it's like, oh, maybe if he batted in the one position. I love Compton, and it's worth going to find the highlights, and he's obviously a really, really entertaining player. But when it comes down to it, I don't think he's in the best 50 test batters of all time. And Oren, you're the first, maybe one of the first or second people to bring him up. Like, he hasn't been brought up all that much. Michael Clark, slightly more. Usually I get Gooch, Gilchrist, I'm forgetting the other one. There's another one as well. And Aravinda and Michael will get mentioned quite a bit as well. But yeah, Compton doesn't come up as much. So I think I'm on fairly safe grounds with that kind of thing. But yeah, the list is changing. I might one day decide that, like, I've got Matt Hayden as an automatic top 50 pick at the moment. I might go through it one day and decide that I overestimated him a little bit. And Muhammad Yusuf, again, another player who I could easily change my mind on. But the players outside usually have a case why they're not in the list, right? And when it comes down to it, that's why we have the range in the list, because there are some players that you can fire up. And you could make an argument for them to be, you could make an argument that I would say off the top of my head with Compton, you could probably make an argument that he could go anywhere from about 47 through to about 67, right? You can make an argument he's the 67th greatest batter of all time or the 47th. And I think both would be very, very fair. Anyway, that's it for me on the Wagon Wheel. Please like, subscribe. We'll be back for Kimappa tomorrow. And there'll be more of these kinds of shenanigans here on the Good Areas Live podcast network.
Ross Taylor couldn't see at night or when the clouds were in. Eventually, he had to see an eye specialist who would fix his eyesight. In the 2 years before the change, he still averaged more than 50 in international cricket. The top level of batting talent can basically see in the dark. That is who we are talking about in our new book, The Art of Batting. Head over and order your copy today.